It's hard to follow that, so we're going to see what we can do. We're going to actually give Francis a solo opportunity here and play a piece called the Fantasie. It's actually a fantasy for violin and piano, but we really wanted to give Francis a challenge. So she's redone it for cello. I don't know if it's been done that way before, but it's a really interesting sound to hear it that way. It's written by Florence Price, a wonderful African-American woman composer who is slowly getting her due. Actually, they just did her piano concerto, one of her piano concertos with the Baltimore Symphony, and it was a phenomenal piece of music. So I'm hoping that her name will keep coming up. But she was lost again for many years. Born in 1887, would die in 1953. She does have the distinction of being the first African-American woman to have a symphony performed by a major symphony orchestra. And the Chicago Symphony Orchestra played her first symphony in 1935 as it was part of a competition that she won. They performed it. So she's had her music out there, and there are 4 symphonies altogether. And you can hear some of them on YouTube. I urge you to do them. They're really good. She came from a mixed family. Her father was the only black dentist in Little Rock, Arkansas at the time. Her mother was white but of Mexican origin, and she apparently was an incredible child prodigy. She started playing piano when she was 3, so she beat you, and apparently played her first public performance at the age of 4 and astounded people with that. Then she started writing music, had her first piece that she wrote at age 7, had one published when she was 9 years old, and then she ended up graduating valedictorian of her high school class when she was 14 years old. So was obviously a really smart person. Ended up going to the New England Conservatory of Music, one of the first African Americans to be entered into that, although she did not go in and saying that she was African American. She was very light-skinned, and she actually said she was Mexican when she went there, because she thought she'd have a better chance to sort of get ahead. But George Chadwick, who was the head of the conservatory and a decent composer, recognized immediately. She went there to play piano and organ. That was her specialties. But he saw that there was some compositional talent there and encouraged it. She was writing a lot of this kind of European romantic music, but she knew that she also arranged some spirituals, and so he encouraged her to try to interweave that spiritual tradition and the blues and all that into her pieces, and that's what you'll hear in this piece and in all of her symphonies. There's a real cool mixing of that Western romantic tradition and the spiritual tradition. She ends up going to Atlanta after she graduates, becomes the head of the music department at Clark University. Then she marries a lawyer, goes back to Little Rock, but in the late 1920s there were several lynching incidents in Little Rock, Arkansas, and like many African Americans at the time, she went on the Great Migration up to Chicago, and got to Chicago in the early 1930s. Unfortunately, she and her husband get divorced. She had 2 young children she had to provide for, so she actually got a job playing organ at the local movie theater for all the silent movies. So she did that for a while. She actually wrote some popular songs under a pseudonym of VJ. So if you have any old records by VJ, that's actually really Florence Price. And in Chicago, she had a wonderful student named Marion Bonds, who would later become a very important composer as well. Bonds was well connected to important folks like Langston Hughes and Marian Anderson, and they listened to some of Florence Price's music, and they encouraged her to try to get it out as much as she could. And so because of them, she enters this competition in 1934, the Wanamaker Foundation Awards. Both her and Bonds enter it, and it's competing against whites and anybody who was in the Chicago area. Florence Price got first prize, and Margaret Bonds got second prize. And because of that first prize, they performed her piece in the symphony in 1934. She writes 4 symphonies, 3 piano concertos, over 300 works that we know of. There might be more actually out there. In fact, in 2009, they discovered a trove of Florence Price manuscripts in an abandoned home outside of Chicago that she may have lived in. We don't know what it was doing there, but there was just music up in the attic written by Florence Price. So a lot of it was not published. We might find more. She was a strong personality. We have one letter that she wrote to Serge Koussevitzky, who was the conductor of the Boston Symphony Orchestra, trying to get him to play her music. And she writes the following: "To begin with, I have 2 handicaps, those of sex and race. I am a woman with some Negro blood in my veins. Knowing the worst, then, would you be good enough to hold in check the possible inclination to regard a woman's composition as long on emotionalism, but short on virility?" She was tough, and she wrote some great stuff, but again, she got some popularity. Marian Anderson, the wonderful singer, sang one of her spiritual arrangements at the Lincoln Memorial, a famous Easter Sunday concert in 1939. There were 75,000 people in attendance at that performance. So hopefully she'll get her due back. Again, this is a piece she wrote around the time of that symphony. We're not quite sure when, but probably 1935 or so. And again, it's a fantasy for violin. We'll do it on cello. You'll hear this opening cadenza by the cello in a kind of more European rhapsodic format. And then as the piece goes on, we get more of the spiritual entering. And towards the end, we sort of get a combination of those two together. So please welcome back Francis Borowsky.